Picture this, it's 1944 and the Allies are staring down a seemingly impossible task, landing roughly 133,000 troops safely onto a heavily fortified, Nazi-occupied coastline. I mean, how do you even begin to hide an invasion of that sheer magnitude? Well, the short answer is you don't. Instead, you perform the ultimate magic trick. You make the enemy look the wrong way. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive right into what is absolutely, without a doubt, the greatest military heist in history.
You know, Winston Churchill really hit the nail on the head when he said, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." That quote right there perfectly captures the clandestine, incredibly high-stakes tone of the Allied misdirection against the German high command. The Allies knew that winning this war wasn't just going to come down to pure firepower. It was going to require intelligence, espionage, and above all, an absolute masterclass in deception.
All right, so let's get into Section 1, the intelligence arsenal, or basically hacking the enemy. Starting back in July of 1943, this highly secretive group of military officers, known as the London Controlling Section, rolled up their sleeves and got to work. Their mission was to build a massive deception operation, codenamed Bodyguard. They essentially had to create an entire infrastructure from the ground up to completely manipulate German intelligence, planting these incredibly elaborate lies that would trickle all the way up to the absolute highest levels of enemy command.
So what was the actual con here? Well, the crown jewel of this whole operation was Operation Fortitude South. This was a very specific plan designed to convince the Germans that the main Allied invasion was going to cross the absolute shortest point of the English Channel and strike at the Pas-de-Calais. The whole point was to make the real, actual landings in Normandy look like nothing more than a tiny diversionary attack. If they could pull this off, they'd effectively trap the strongest German forces exactly where the Allies wouldn't be.
Now, to pull the strings on this massive deception, the Allies relied on two unbelievable pillars of intelligence. On one hand, we've got Ultra. This was the intel coming straight out of Bletchley Park, where codebreakers had miraculously cracked the supposedly unbreakable German Enigma code. This meant the Allies could actually intercept signals and secretly verify, hey, are the Germans actually buying our lie? And on the other hand, we have the double-cross system. Run by MI5's 20 Committee, they completely controlled a network of double agents, including the legendary spy Garbo, and used them to spoon-feed the Germans a steady, super believable stream of totally fake intelligence.
But hey, codes and whispers aren't going to be enough to fool a reconnaissance plane flying overhead, right? You need physical proof. Which brings us to Section 2, building a phantom army and the fake props. The Allies basically turned southeast England into a massive, ocean-spanning movie set.
And the absolute star of this movie was FUSAG, the first United States Army group. This was a completely fictitious, totally imaginary army that the Allies conjured out of literal thin air just to fool the Germans. To the enemy looking across the channel, this massive, overwhelming force was supposedly stationed right there in southeast England, just waiting to strike directly at Dover.
So how do you make a ghost army look terrifyingly real? They used a pretty brilliant three-step recipe. First up, assign a commander. They picked the highly respected and deeply feared General George Patton, mostly because he was exactly the guy the Germans expected to lead the main assault. Second, start building dummy landing craft and tanks. And third, use those double agents we just talked about to constantly leak fake intel about the supposed troop movements of this imaginary army.
And the sheer creativity behind the physical deception? It was just astounding. I mean, they were building these dummy landing craft and deploying them in harbors and estuaries all around Dover using scaffolding tube, wood, canvas, and empty 40-gallon barrels. It literally sounds like the props for a high school theater production. But here's the thing. When viewed from a distance, or more importantly, from thousands of feet up in the air by a German reconnaissance plane, these props perfectly simulated a very real, very active army preparing to cross the channel.
Okay, but a silent army is a dead giveaway. You've got the visuals, now you need the noise to match. Moving on to Section 3, broadcasting the illusion, or the war of words. This required an invisible but absolutely massive radio spoofing campaign to make this fake army sound completely authentic to the German listening posts across the water. To pull this off, the Allies set up the cute Dover repeater station. Just picture this. Deep inside the secret, damp underground tunnels of Dover Castle, you've got British and Canadian signalers completely trapped underground, and they are just frantically transmitting a huge volume of fake radio broadcasts all over Britain to simulate the communication network of FUSAG. They were sending out a relentless, non-stop stream of coded lies that, honestly, they didn't even understand themselves.
And keeping up this illusion required a staggering amount of human effort. We're talking grueling 8-hour shifts, around the clock, 7 days a week, for weeks on end in the spring of 1944. These signalers had to maintain a totally flawless, constant stream of radio traffic just to make absolutely sure the Germans never suspected a thing.
So, all of this meticulous preparation, all the props, the codes, the radio traffic, it was all building towards one massive historical moment. Section 4, the ultimate payoff and the big reveal. Let's see how this unprecedented misdirection actually played out when D-Day finally arrived.
When D-Day finally hit, the illusion collided with reality. Think about the setup. On one side, you have the fictional target, the Pas-de-Calais, the fake Fusag army, and General Patton. On the exact opposite side, you have the real target, the beaches of Normandy, the actual invasion force, and General Montgomery leading real troops, including the 1st Canadian Army. And you know what? The Allies completely sold the misdirection. While the Germans were dug in, bracing for Patton at Calais, Montgomery and the real forces were busy crossing the Channel.
And if you want to see just how mind-blowing this trick really was, just look at the timeline. The deception planning starts way back in July 1943. By the spring of 1944, that massive fake radio traffic network is fully deployed. June 6, 1944, D-Day hits Normandy. But look at that final date, August 1944. A full 2 months after the actual invasion, the Germans still believed Fusag was real. They kept their vital, heavy armored units just sitting at Calais, waiting for an invasion that was quite literally never going to come.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Why does this matter so much? Well, the success of Operation Fortitude South successfully kept German reinforcements away from the real, brutal fighting front in Normandy. By paralyzing the enemy and making them wait for a ghost army, it saved thousands upon thousands of Allied lives. It literally secured the firm foothold that was absolutely 100% necessary for the liberation of Europe.
Which really leaves us with kind of a crazy final thought, right? How did a massive global conflict, fought with the world's most devastating weapons, ultimately depend so heavily on a war of words, empty props, and sheer illusions? It's just this incredible reminder that sometimes the absolute greatest victories aren't won purely with firepower, they're won with human ingenuity and a brilliantly executed lie. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the history behind the facts.